So our next reader is a student from Pueblo High School. Jasmine is here, and she's going to read. She is a student at Pueblo, and she likes to sing. And we'd like to welcome her up here. Jasmine?
Okay, hey, how's everybody doing today? I've never been to something like this, and it's really amazing the kind of events that you guys can set up. So I'm not really poetic or much, but I kind of wrote a poem for you guys today. I don't know.
That makes you poetic.
But you know what I mean. I'm not a good writer, but I try. Okay, so youth are on a search to expand their minds, looking for ourselves in a journey we call life, leaving footprints over time. As we grow, we learn. We wonder where our roots begin. To start from the beginning, you have to look within. And when we, I'm nervous, sorry. And when we find that our textbooks are not enough, we open the door to ethnic studies to find what it may offer us. Heritage stands loud, our culture we hold proud. To one human race do we pertain, ethnic studies never vain. Unidos we stand, to make a change is our plan. Equality we demand, racism is a scam. How can we be free to study our own kind when house bills try to put limits on our minds? They say we're promoting preferential treatment in our race, but I'd like to put them face to face and show them that we do not discriminate. We're tired of all this hate going around. It's time to put the boundaries down. Ethics studies is not going down without a fight. It's in the 14th Amendment to protect our own rights.
Thank you, Jasmine. Okay, our next reader is Django Paris. Django is Assistant Professor of English at Arizona State University. His research on language, literacy, and equity with youth of color has been published in numerous journals and books, including the Harvard Educational Review. His first book, Language Across Difference, will be out in August with Cambridge University Press. Django will be reading from an essay entitled Become History, Learning from Identity Texts and Youth Activism in the Wake of Arizona SB 1070. Welcome, Django.
Thank you, Renee. This is so amazing to be here in Tucson and to see you all. You know you're in like an interstitial space between young and old when two of your high school students come and they're now teaching high school. So hi, Ruth and Anthony. Your former high school students, I should say. All right. I spent last school year doing, this needs to come way up, but I'm just going to do that. I spent last school year doing case studies with a group of Latina women, African-American students at a school I call Desert High. Building off my previous research, work that continues to be informed by my identity as a black, white, biracial scholar and as a classroom teacher of many years, I was interested in how students offered revisions of literacy learning through their participation in identity texts, how youth wrote themselves onto clothing, binders, backpacks, public spaces, rap lyrics, and electronic media. These texts work to claim voice, power, and dignity in situations of cultural and linguistic marginalization. I used my work with Pedro, a Mexican-American 11th grader born and raised in urban Arizona, as a window into the question, what role did text, those Pedro was asked to compose and consume in schools, and those he authored and consumed in youth space, play in Pedro's reading and writing of the world? Critical educator Paulo Freire writes that to exist, humanly, is to name the world, to change it. Human beings are not built in silence, but in word, in work, in action, and reflection. My inquiry with Pedro takes on increased importance in the context of Arizona, a state that already serves as many of students of color as European American students in public schools. Shifting demographics coupled with a state policy climate that seeks to narrowly define how ethnicity, language, and literacy are taught, learned, and lived has made understanding the experiences of youth of color in Arizona a top priority. Such understanding can help students, teachers, researchers, and policymakers to push back on policies like SB 1070 and HB 2281 that fly in the face of decades of research-based evidence. Vignette number 1. It is mid-December. The class has been reading 2 poems from Langston Hughes, I Too, and The Negro Speaks of Rivers. The teacher begins explaining her interpretations of the poems. I look over at Pedro, who is texting with one hand and copying notes with another. He turns to his neighbor and begins an impromptu flow. I'm a rapper, battling everyone. He's not a raptor. That would make this like a really exciting essay. I'm a rapper, battling everyone, throwing them down. You diss my mom, I diss you, mom. You come at me, I come at you. I wonder at Langston Hughes' voice in the poem as he states, I too sing America. I too am America. And I wonder what Pedro might sing about his America. It is February now, and the class is printing information on William Faulkner. After he prints off his notes, Pedro is looking at some websites about his parents' native Sinaloa, Mexico. He shows me a corrido band on the computer called Los Cuates de Sinaloa. According to the band, corridos are stories taken from real life put into song. In their music, explains one band member, they report the news about drug cartels, violence, and police corruption. And I wonder then about the stories of corridos and what stories Pedro knows and wants to tell. Sitting on a bench at the school, I ask Pedro about reading and writing in English class. He tells me, reading it never gets to me. I don't hate reading because it depends on what I'm reading. Like right now, I'm really interested in the mafia. I go and Google what's going on. I don't read books specifically, but I just read the articles on Wikipedia and everything. When I go on there and learn about the mafia, how it's going in Mexico and all this, how the people are getting left and everything and what they do. During all these months, there has been a district-sponsored poster on the wall besides Pedro's desk. It reads, "The only violence in schools should be the kind you read about in history classes. Be smart. Don't become history." On the poster, there was a picture of a history textbook open to a page titled Civil War. Be smart. Don't become history. History is in the past. Violence is in the past. The Civil War, that violent battle for, among other things, human rights, is in the past. Leave it there. Such struggles are not a part of school. Vignette number 2. In April, State Bill 1070 was passed by the legislature. Some days after the law was passed, Jan Brewer was set to sign the bill into law. I had an interview with Pedro scheduled at the school. I text Pedro before I drive over. I text, "We on for after school at the front gate?" Pedro texts back, "I left to march." I text, "That's right, life in La Lucha, where you at?" Pedro, "Haha, hell yeah, and on my way downtown." I meet Pedro and his fellow student protesters at the state capitol. There are hundreds of students marching in from all directions. Pedro has brought a megaphone his mother gave him for the protest. "Don't get deported," she had told him when he mentioned the walkout. "We're doing this for you," said Pedro. A friend of Pedro's has written Veto SB 1070 in permanent marker across Pedro's shirt. Another friend has written Stop Racism on his own shirt. I understand these inscriptions as fierce identity texts of reflection upon relevant problems embedded in action to solve those problems. The two young men hold up a sign together that reads, "Arizona, Stop SB 1070. Pedro, megaphone in hand, joins the crowd in chanting, "El pueblo, unido, jamás será vencido." These spoken claims of justice in the face of injustice join with identity text to create a mosaic of the written and spoken word, together communicating what I hear as the most basic and necessary message: we are here, we are human. I asked Pedro how all the students knew to walk out of class today from so many different schools. Pedro tells me that a friend had sent out a text the night before. He shows me the text. "Walk out, all schools, Thursday, April 22nd. Fuck SB 1070. Stop the racial profiling, stop the injustice. We walk at 11 and we're marching." The text had reached many hundreds of students in several area high schools. As teachers, we so often think of texting as a hindrance to the sorts of literacy we were after in school. Yet here was a text message that had galvanized youth to leave school in search of voice, power, and dignity in the face of a state policy which they and their communities viewed as offering little of either. I asked Pedro about his experience marching that day. "Remember the time that Martin Luther King and them were marching," he said. "They got sprayed with water and everything. They still didn't care. They fought for their rights. I think that if they're going to racial profile us and nobody does nothing about it, someone has to step up. And the people that stepped up for us, it was us, the students. We were the ones that took our choice and we started marching downtown to make a difference." What seemed in my time with Pedro like disconnected textual worlds, text messages, corridos, raps, news about cartels and immigration, Langston Hughes, William Faulkner, signs, shirts, text messages, chants. must be joined in common purpose for reading and writing the world. Be smart, do not become history, advised the poster in Pedro's class. Pedro's participation calls out a different message. Be smart, become history. The current situation in Arizona has reminded us in no uncertain terms that our work as teachers and researchers is not about language and literacy learning and educational experiences in a mythical political vacuum. Our work as teachers and researchers has always been about the struggle for language and literacy rights and human rights. This work and this struggle continue for Pedro as they do for all of us in Arizona and beyond. The stakes could not be higher. Thanks.
Thank you, Django. Okay, our next reader is Ray. Ray Paris received a National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship in 2010. The title story of her collection, The Girl Who Ate Her Own Skin, was a recommended story in the 2009 O. Henry Prize Stories. She will be reading from her novella, Love Lies Bleeding, which focuses on a young woman of color in a high school that seriously needs some ethnic studies.
Okay, so there's just a few references I need to explain. The story takes place in 1984, and so there's some 80s references. One is Roxanne, Roxanne, which was a rap song by UTFO, which is a really great rap song, and I think it's, I said this before, it's highly feminist. Then there's also a reference to the movie Magic, which is the late 70s, and in the movie Magic there's a psycho dummy, and so the narrator of the story thinks her English teacher looks like this dummy. And the character's Lena. Lena's black, Gigi is half Guamanian and white, and the narrator's black. And then the narrator is also a cutter, or self-mutilator, which means she cuts her body as a way of coping with stress. And then the last two things. Her parents are from New Orleans, and then the class is reading a book called The Awakening by Kate Chopin, which takes place at the end of the 19th century in New Orleans. Mrs. A sits on the edge of her desk, her legs crossed at the ankles. She's wearing baby doll ruffled socks and shiny patent leather shoes. Her feet swing back and forth. So, says Mrs. A, The Awakening. What'd you think? Lena raises her hand, but doesn't wait for Mrs. A to call on her. I didn't get the ending. Mrs. A presses her lips together and nods, irritated. She asked to hear from someone who did get it. Stacy, always the suck-up, and the queen of generalization, says she thought it was very interesting and important and sad. Mrs. A asked her to elaborate, as if Stacy has said something groundbreaking. I mean, says Stacy, Edna died, right? That's so sad. Does she die, says Mrs. A? Is it sad? And the lame conversation begins. You flip to the back of your notebook and read through the words to Roxanne, Roxanne. Lena says she thinks Edna is a spoiled, she's about to say bitch or something else, which makes you look up, but Lena catches herself and says spoiled lady. You nod. Mrs. A asks if anyone else thinks this is true, but it's clear she doesn't agree. No one raises a hand. Mrs. A smiles and shrugs at Lena. Some girl who lives in the hills talks about how her mother had a black nanny and how much she, the girl's mother, loved her. Interesting, says Mrs. A, and asks for more comments. Lena shuts her book, crosses her arms, and stares at the clock on the wall above Mrs. A's head. Gigi hasn't bothered to lift her head at all. Mrs. A doesn't care what you think, so you're safe from her calling on you. But if she did ask your opinion, you'd say you've only been to New Orleans once when you were small, but the whole time you were reading, the damp, funky smell of old streets kept hitting you like you'd been there yesterday, and your parents, like somebody might kidnap all of you, hold your sister's hand, stay together. How your mother could explain some of the words in the book, banquette, sidewalk, quadroon, 1/4, Creole, you. And how even though Edna's white, that's your mother almost exactly, give up the unessential for her kids, money, life, but not herself. Has she? Except she wouldn't say it like that. How she sometimes lies on her bed with the lights out, a cool washcloth on her forehead, and says she just needs some peace and quiet. She'd leave all of you if she could. Edna is spoiled. She is. She doesn't have to work at all and has black women taking care of her kids and cooking for her, but she doesn't have anything that's her own until she wins the money at the horse races and gets her own apartment, which is so weak. But even the apartment doesn't really belong to her. And you don't own anything, but the inside of your thigh starts itching and you cross your legs, scars like tiny road maps on your body, which doesn't feel like as if it belongs to you either. Roxanne, Roxanne. Gigi's hand reaches up and grabs your copy of The Awakening. Startled, you tug back, but it's no use. Your book disappears under her head, and then she passes it back, one of the pages folded. What the hell is she wearing, wrote Gigi. Underneath, a picture of Mrs. A in her ruffled jumper. Puppet strings stretch from Mrs. A's dangling hands all the way above her head and hang from a hook on a chalkboard. Her head is tilted to one side. On the chalkboard are the words, "Does she die? Is it sad?" It's a good drawing. You told Gigi about the movie Magic. You smile and scratch it out. Mrs. A has moved on to phallic symbols, her favorite. Look, she says, here, here, and here. Stacy asks if the ocean is a phallic symbol, but Mrs. A says no. The ocean is a vagina. There's a difference. But she says you can probably make a compelling argument that the liquid is partly phallic. People groan. Think about it, says Mrs. A. Why do you think Chopin decided to end the book with Edna swimming into a vagina? What does it mean? Mrs. A hasn't said if there's a word to describe when things look like a girl's privates. No way are you going to ask. No one's saying anything, so you raise your hand and ask what you've wanted to ask all along. How the Creoles in the story can be white and Creole. Your mother didn't know the answer to this. Mrs. A stares at you. I don't know, she says, but it's not that important to the story. We're talking about phallic symbols. Lena shakes her head at you like, why'd you even bother? Gigi grabs your book again. You don't care if Mrs. A sees. She's talking about the next book you're reading, A Passage to India. What a bitch, wrote Gigi. You don't scratch it out. You think about Walt Whitman. Last week when you read him, Mrs. A had a field day with the phallic symbols, but you fell in love with him anyway. Ever since then, he started appearing in the classroom at odd times. He bursts through the door now, picks up Mrs. A as if she's a doll, turns her around and opens a small door in her dress to show the class that she really is a dummy. Everyone gasps. You say, I knew it. Walt sets her on his lap and puts his hand inside her back. Her mouth begins to move. I celebrate myself, she says, for every penis and vagina that belongs to me as good belongs to you.